6,000 acres. 6,000 acres in the wildland is basically nothing. 6,000 acres in an urban and suburban environment, will get you 1,000 houses, and so now we have all manner of contamination. The ash is toxic, right? From it's not just wood fires. So those who stayed, those whose houses were not destroyed, it's now covered in ash. They have soot in the house. This is toxic soot, and so it's an ongoing disaster, quite frankly, for many people. And the rebuilding is not going to be simple. We spent the first night in a shelter, so luckily the emergency services were pretty good. They have disaster playbook. They pulled it out. We were treated very well. We spent the first night at the YMCA, and then after that we moved into a hotel. We just lost our possessions, so that's how we think of it. That the number one thing is we're alive. Luckily, it happened during the daytime hours. If this would have happened at night, you would have had body count on this, no question. I thought we would be coming back to a home. I thought it'd be a 1 day, 2 day, couple day inconvenience. I didn't think that was it. It really was literally like a tornado, like a fire tornado. We don't have, any belongings, quite frankly, just whatever we got. We have a small amount, stick it in the car and go. The last thing you want to mess with is climate, right? You don't know where it's going to strike, how it's going to strike you. So think about whatever your normal situation, whatever your normal hazard is in your area, whatever it is. It could be flood, could be wind, could be a drought, and whatever it is, just think about it amplified 10 times, right? So that's what happened. That's what happened to us. We were in a historic drought that we haven't had. I don't think ever. It's the society that we're living in with all of our systems. Our systems are not designed to handle catastrophes, just like traffic, right? Trying to get out, traffic jams, you're trying to evacuate, the water supply, right? Your firefighting capacity, right? It's overwhelmed, right? So, humans are used to living within a bound, right? A bound of climate and a bound of their system's capability. And when you start going outside of those bounds, which we're doing now, right? Look out. It's only a matter of time.
In the present-day consumerist format of society, most areas are not at all adapted to the force and amount of natural disasters that are occurring, and therefore to their consequences. More and more people who found themselves amidst a natural cataclysm have noticed this. An eyewitness will tell us what people faced during the historical flooding in Australia.
My name is Dean Johnston. I live on the east coast of Australia in what's called the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. I am an airline pilot, and I also pastor a church here in the local community. So on the 28th of February this year, the Northern Rivers area in New South Wales experienced the largest flood on record. Lismore is called a flood town, so they're used to it. However, this one was completely unlike anything else that has been experienced or recorded. It surpassed all the expectations and was an absolute disaster. So the river height got to 14.4 metres above its normal height and basically wiped out several towns, thousands of homes. It's left businesses decimated, people without anywhere to sleep. This is unlike anything that's ever been recorded in over 200 years of recorded history here. A lot of people did evacuate the area earlier, but many people didn't. And so there were many people caught by surprise by the rising floodwaters, and they were caught in roof cavities. There were elderly people who had to climb onto the roofs of their houses and wait for many hours to be rescued. And because all the roads were cut off, there were no real emergency services. The military wasn't able to get there. The emergency services weren't able to help. You'd always assume when a flood comes, you can just swim away. but people actually got stuck in the houses. The water pressure up against the windows and up against the doors meant you couldn't open them because they all open outwards. So people were stuck. And to escape it, they thought the level of water was only going to rise so far. So they went up into their roofs, which of course have no exit. Once you're in a roof cavity in a house in Australia, which we have no exits from our roofs. So people were literally trapped, almost like being trapped in an upside down boat. The flood really occurred around 2 or 3 in the morning. Most people were asleep in their beds. So this was a case of not realizing and waking up to strange sounds and noises and realizing there was water in your bedroom and you're on a 2nd-story building and you no longer can get out of your house. And so the only thing to do is to grab your children and your pets and belongings and try and escape through a window or a manhole into a roof cavity and to get out onto the roof and wait for rescue. And this all happened in pitch black darkness. The warnings didn't give an accurate picture of what was to come. And there are questions being asked now about the meteorological warning systems that were in place, about the monitoring of river systems, about the emergency services that were available to be deployed at the time. It was distressing how helpless we all felt. If you weren't actually in the area and you didn't have a boat, there's nothing you could do. And the only thing that really saved the town was the ordinary community members getting out in their small boats and their canoes and kayaks and actually performing rescues of the people in the community. We were involved in setting up food tents. We had a situation in the end of the first week after the flood where their supermarkets were empty. There was no food. There was no drinking water available. The entire town still had no electricity. And all of the fuel stations, the petrol stations were empty. So you weren't even able to drive out of the area. So it was on the verge of not only being a natural disaster, but a humanitarian crisis. So we managed to set up a food distribution centre in the city where we could just disseminate just basics, water and food to people until the roads opened and the supply lines opened again. It's actually been beautiful to see people step up and take responsibility for their communities, for their neighbours, and to see a resilient spirit in people. And also a generosity that came out of people that you might not have observed before. Is it come to that point that the effects of climate change have meant we're actually moving the location of our cities to deal with them. There are some people still under the illusion that we can prevent this, that this is not about climate change. There are people who still think this is just a freak storm and we can rebuild. But I think most people now are realizing that this is something that's going to happen and keep happening. And we have to act in a fairly dire way to mitigate the effects. So one way that we need to confront this global crisis is by employing ways that help us bring down those boundaries, by employing ways that help us to see other human beings as other human beings, by seeing people as our neighbours who perhaps are on the other side of the world. And so anything that we can do to help that process is good.
If you have witnessed a climate anomaly, send your video footage to climate@creativesociety.com. On March 21st, 2022, Cyclone Asani hit the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. In the central part of the islands, heavy rains and hurricane-force winds felled trees, damaging power lines. Thousands of people were evacuated from coastal areas. The topic of abnormal precipitation in New Zealand is continued in the next story.
On March the 21st, 2022, northern New Zealand was hit by heavy downpours, which in some places exceeded 70 mm per hour. Auckland received more than the average monthly rainfall overnight. The rains were accompanied by high thunderstorm activity. More than 4,000 lightning strikes were recorded in 1 hour in the Auckland and Northland regions, including more than 700 strikes within 5 minutes. The storm caused damage to homes, businesses and highways. The resulting flooding led to disruptions in public transportation, cancelled ferry and airline flights, and closed schools and stores. In the Auckland suburbs, people had to navigate the streets in kayaks and surfboards.
Synchronization of climatic anomalies intensifies their negative consequences. A striking evidence of this is that on March 23rd to 24th, simultaneously, a sunstorm and abnormal rains hit the Spanish province of Malaga, which caused flooding. An orange warning was declared in the province. The synchronization of abnormal snowfalls in Europe and Asia will be addressed by a breaking news reporter from Armenia.
Hello, this is breaking news reporter from Armenia. On March 19, 2022, a powerful snowfall covered most of the territory of the Republic of Armenia. Blizzards, ice and poor visibility on the roads were observed. As a result, some roads were closed completely. March 18th to 19th, Georgia. The heaviest snowfall in the last few years hit the city of Tbilisi and its suburbs. Heavy snowfall left residents of some villages in Ajara without electricity and heat. Because of the avalanches at mountain passes, dozens of villages were cut off from the outside world. On March 18th, the year's third heavy snowfall struck Istanbul, Turkey. Due to the disaster, school classes were cancelled in some provinces of the country. An orange danger level was declared in 8 cities. On the same day, up to 25 centimeters of snow fell in the city of Sochi, Russia. Such weather is not typical for this city, but cases of snowfall in March have become more frequent in recent years. On March 17th, 18th, a blizzard blanketed parts of Beijing, China. The snowfall brought along cold temperatures, icy roads and thick fog.
The Arctic and Antarctica experience unthinkable heat. On March the 18th, 2022, 10 degrees Fahrenheit was recorded at Concordia Weather Station in Antarctica. This temperature has exceeded the average by almost 70 degrees Fahrenheit. A little earlier, an extreme temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than normal, was also recorded in the Arctic. The strangeness of what is happening is also that there are opposite seasons in the poles now. Spring is in the Arctic and autumn is in Antarctica, so they shouldn't melt at the same time. In addition, the southernmost continent tends to warm up more slowly than other parts of the globe. According to the National Snow and Ice Data Center at the University of Colorado, the areas around the North Pole are nearing or have already begun to melt, which is not typical to mid-March. On February the 25th, 2022, Antarctic sea ice reached a record minimum extent at about 741,000 square miles. Information about the degradation of the Antarctic ice sheet was announced at the international online conference Global Crisis – Time for the Truth on December the 4th, 2021.
Everyone has already heard that glaciers are melting catastrophically fast, but have you heard about how exactly they are melting? 90% of all glaciers on the planet are located in Antarctica, where they are disappearing the fastest. What is striking is that this is taking place solely in the western part of Antarctica, whereas in the east, record-breaking cold temperatures are being recorded. A logical question arises: why is Antarctica melting only on one side? And the answer is quite simple. West Antarctica has a totally different geology. It consists of thin blocks of the Earth's crust that are separated from each other by large tectonic faults, rift zones. And in these zones, greater amounts of heat are released. For example, scientists from Germany and the British Antarctic Survey mapped the geothermal heat flow in West Antarctica using data from aeromagnetic observations beneath the Thwaites Glacier. They discovered an area where a huge amount of heat comes from the Earth's bowels. According to scientists, this is due to the fact that the glacier lies in a tectonic trench where the Earth's crust is much thinner. Surprisingly enough, West Antarctica is one of the largest volcanic regions on Earth. There are more than 140 volcanoes sleeping under the ice, and they are now much more active than the scientific community previously believed. A team of researchers from the University of Rhode Island discovered a new factor in the rapid melting of the Pine Island Glacier in Antarctica. It's an earlier unidentified active volcano buried deep beneath the ice. Evidence of volcanism was indicated by high concentrations of the helium isotope, which comes exclusively from the Earth's mantle. According to Professor Karen Haywood, geothermal heat from the West Antarctic Rift warms the ocean water. This in turn leads to the acceleration of ice sheet melting. Thus, it is the geothermal heat from volcanoes that is contributing to the rapid melting of the Antarctic ice sheet, not global warming at all. But why are there so many volcanoes under the ice of Antarctica? NASA experts have found out the reason based on data from NASA's IceSat and IceBridge satellites. They have concluded that under the surface of West Antarctica, there is a large mantle plume that is a flow of red-hot magma which rises and expands beneath the Earth's crust. According to the scientists' calculations, this area is warming with almost the same intensity as the Yellowstone supervolcano. The heat flux measures 150 milliwatts per square meter, reaching 180 in the rift areas. This is about 3 times as much heat as the adjacent rock layers receive. Thus, all indications are that glaciers in Antarctica are melting, not at all due to anthropogenic factors, but due to the volcanic heat. At the same time, the temperature of the Earth's crust is rising and parts of the territory are elevating abnormally. Why does the scientific community ignore the connection between all these phenomena?
We are observing a record rate in increase in natural disasters. There is no doubt that urgent action must be taken to prevent a climate apocalypse. But because the real causes of what is happening to the climate are understudied and sometimes deliberately falsified, our ill-considered actions could further worsen our planet's condition.
Let us track what is going on. After all, during every cycle, there's always an accumulation of carbon dioxide, methane, and everything else. It's like the result of warming and everything else. If we track from the beginning of warming, it's about 10 or 11 months. CO2 level begins to increase, regardless of whether there were people or not. That's the reaction of our planet. Afterwards, when warming subsides, CO2 level recedes to normal, and it all comes to an average amount. When cycles occur, CO2 rises even higher. That's clear. And now a question. Let's just think about it as intelligent people, capable of some kind of reflection. Why does this happen? And let's look at what is happening to our atmosphere. And why are trees, instead of absorbing CO2, begin to emit much more of it? Why? What is going on with the trees? Do they mutate so fast, or what? Not just in some particular place, but almost everywhere. As soon as the temperature rises, mutations begin.
Yes.
Yet, what is actually taking place? And we look, where does this CO2 go? into the atmosphere. Where's the main reaction taking place? In the upper layers of the atmosphere. What happens? The lower layers drastically heat up, while the upper layers drastically cool down. Okay, such cooling and heating is formed. What does that lead to? Densification, right? Okay, what does densification of the atmosphere mean? If we look at those heights, the atmosphere is rarefied. That is, molecules. The molecules of gases, air, water, everything are at a great distance from each other. And when this kind of densification occurs, they begin to compress. What do they compress for? What's the point? And why does this always coincide with the solar minimum? Why is the solar minimum formed? What restrains it? The solar minimum reduces the activity of the sun. The electromagnetic field of the sun itself weakens, and the sun produces less radiation, which means that somewhere in remote areas, after all, it protects us with both its electromagnetic field and its radiation from something that comes from the outside, right? It means that more of something starts coming from the outside, and this more of something has to pass through our atmosphere to our planet and cause something. So warming takes place. And as soon as our planet feels that more of something begins to enter it than is necessary, what does it begin to do? Protect itself. That is, the immune system is triggered. So, as a result of this immunity reaction, the ocean starts to emit more carbon dioxide. Trees start to emit more carbon dioxide. There's an accumulation of it. And such a paradox occurs, which we observe today in our atmosphere. It is very similar to the skin immunity of our bodies.
Our civilization is on the brink of extinction. We have only one chance to direct all human and scientific potential to solve the problem of global climate crisis. In order to survive as humanity, we must unite in a timely manner to build the creative society. Learn more about the project at creativesociety.com. Thank you for being with us today, and see you soon on Creative Society TV.